इतनी शक्ति हमें दे न दाता, मन का विश्वास कमजोर होना। इतनी शक्ति हमें दे न दाता, मन का विश्वास कमजोर होना। हम चले नेक रास्ते पे हमसे भूल कर भी कोई भूल होना। इतनी शक्ति हमें दे न दाता, मन का विश्वास कमजोर होना। दूर अज्ञान के हो अंधेरे, तू हमें ज्ञान की रोशनी दे। हर बुराई से बच के रहे हम, जितनी भी दे भली जिंदगी दे। बैर होना किसी का किसी से, भावना हो न बदले की होना। हम चले नेक रास्ते पे हमसे भूल कर भी कोई भूल होना। इतनी शक्ति हमें दे न दाता, मन का विश्वास कमजोर होना। हर तरफ जुल्म है बेबसी है, सहमा सहमा सा हर आदमी है। पाप का बोझ बढ़ता ही जाए, जाने कैसे ये धरती बसी है। बोझ ममता का तू में उठा ले, तेरी रचना का एक अंत होना। हम चले नेक रास्ते पे हमसे भूल कर भी कोई भूल होना। इतनी शक्ति हमें दे न दाता, मन का विश्वास कमजोर होना।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. You just heard a beautiful song in the melodious voice of Basudhara. And if there are some who didn't understand the language, it was a prayer to the divine for courage and strength. Courage and strength which become very necessary because we live in a world where we are surrounded by a lot of wrong going on, lot of evil, injustice, misery, suffering. And to maintain faith, to maintain confidence in ourselves, we do need a lot of courage and strength. And this was a prayer exactly for that courage and strength, so that our faith doesn't slacken, it becomes unshakable. So it was for that unshakable faith that this prayer was about. And it is one of the beautiful sort of expressions in this comes is that we may be very sincere in trying to do at least our bit well, but then we can make mistakes. So even by mistake, we should not commit any mistake. Bhul kar bhi koi bhool hona. So let me not commit mistakes, even by mistake. So with that we go to today's session, which I thought is necessary, although it's not a part of nutrition, because some of you may not have done the previous course Yes.01. So a brief idea of what yoga is and how it can be brought into daily life and how it can sweeten the journey of our life may be in order. And those who did Yes.01, for them it will be a sort of a recap. So that is what today's session is about, the journey of life. When we talk of the journey of life, we are actually talking about a small bit in a very long journey. The journey of the soul is in fact much longer, and this life constitutes only one small bit of that longer journey. And since in practice, for all practical purposes, it is the journey in this life from birth to death which we are most concerned with, which we can relate to most easily, and which is what matters in terms of what we should be doing to make our life meaningful and purposeful and to help the further evolution of the soul. The journey that we'll be talking about will be essentially restricted to this journey in this life, and that is what we can consider sort of the journey, because the journey within the journey is itself a journey from birth to death. Before we go further, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This program, yes, is a part of the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. So the topic is the journey of life. The first question that arises is, what is yoga? Because we are talking about bringing yoga into this journey. So let's try to understand a bit about what yoga is. A popular answer to this question might be that yoga consists of these practices such as asanas, pranayama and meditation. But then if we think about it, what do these practices actually do? What they do is to improve the performance of the body and the mind. Asanas primarily that of the body, meditation primarily that of the mind, and pranayama being the bridge between the two, the body and the mind, helps perhaps both. But then these divisions are arbitrary and only for simplification. Asanas help not only the body but also the mind. In fact, the asanas can in themselves become a meditative experience, as we shall see in the class day after tomorrow. And pranayama, of course, helps both the body and the mind by preparing the background for that quietude of the body, which can let the prana flow into the body and do its job much better, and at the same time also creating that background silence which prepares us for meditation. And meditation, while it is primarily for the mind, would definitely affect the body because of the close mind-body relationship. It's when we are cheerful and happy that we are also healthy, and if we do fall sick, we recover much faster and better. On the other hand, no matter how well we are eating and exercising, if we are not at peace, we are still likely to have low immunity levels, and therefore we are likely to fall ill more often. And therefore anything which helps the mind, just such as meditation, would also help the body. But basically what these techniques are doing is improving the performance of the body and the mind. And what are the body and the mind? The body and the mind are mere instruments that we have for action in the world. While improving the function of the instruments is important, it's necessary and desirable, that is in itself not enough. Why? Because an instrument can be used for good as well as evil. For example, a knife is an instrument. We can use the knife for chopping fruits and vegetables, but we can also use the same knife to stab somebody. In the same way, if a person uses these techniques, the asanas, pranayamas and meditation, to improve the performance of the body and the mind, this person will be able to do whatever that person does much better, because in whatever we do, we use this instrument, the body-mind complex, That is what helps us do whatever we do, and therefore improving the performance of these instruments will make the person a better teacher, and also a scientist, a manager, or a farmer will also be able to do his job much better if he has improved the performance of the body and the mind. But then just think of a question. Suppose there is a terrorist who is physically unfit, emotionally unstable, and mentally dull. Will this person be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? He won't be able to do it. But if this person also uses these techniques, asanas, pranayamas in meditation, to improve the performance of the body and the mind, he improves his chances of becoming a more successful terrorist. Now, if a technique, or rather a system, helps a terrorist as much as it helps a teacher, it cannot qualify as a spiritual discipline. What makes yoga a spiritual discipline is the fact that it not only has the techniques for improving the function of the instruments, that is the body and the mind, it also has guidance on how to use the instruments. And if a person uses this guidance available in yoga, the person will not become a terrorist. And we have, for using this guidance, the whole day and night available to us. And therefore, while we may take only an hour or two on the techniques which improve the performance of the body and the mind, we have the rest of the day available to us for using the guidance available in yoga for using these instruments. And that is what makes yoga a 24-hour discipline and makes all life yoga. So, to sum it up, yoga is these techniques, of course, the asanas, pranayamas in meditation, but it also includes the guidance on how to use our instruments, the body and the mind. What type of guidance it provides, we shall see today a little later. We might also put it mathematically. Yoga is equal to the techniques of yoga plus the guidance it provides for using the instruments for living a life. And we might say therefore that yoga has a visible and an invisible component. The visible component are the techniques, because anyone can see somebody doing the asanas and pranayamas and so on. But then when the person is using the guidance available in yoga for guiding his life, that is not very visible. Others can't see it. This is something going on inside the person, it's going on within, it's an inner journey. It is not something easily visible, except that people may notice that now this person is doing his job much better, or he has become more loving and kind, or he doesn't easily lose his temper. Some of these things people may notice, but then so far as the work this person is doing, for all practical purposes, those who are seeing this person would feel that, well, still doing the same thing and it's the same person. So yoga has a visible and an invisible component, and it is the invisible component which in a way is more important, because that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. Now let's start with the journey. And as in any journey, there are three basic components: the driver, the vehicle, and the destination. Now in any journey, it is important that the driver should be physically and mentally fit. And in this journey of life, the drivers, that is we ourselves, can be physically and mentally fit through the techniques and other guidance available in yoga, guidance about how to eat, how to sleep, etc. All this guidance is available in yoga, and using that we can become physically and mentally fit. So the driver in this journey has become physically and mentally fit. The next component is the vehicle. Now, how important is the vehicle in any journey? Important in the sense of being of critical importance for reaching the goal itself. The vehicle might make some difference to the speed at which we travel or how comfortably we travel, but when it comes to the possibility of reaching the goal, the vehicle is rather irrelevant. Because if a person knows where he has to go, even a bike will take him there. If he doesn't, even a car will not. Why this is important to understand is because in the journey of life, the vehicle available to us is life itself. Life itself is the vehicle that has been provided to us for going towards the goal of life. And this is important to understand because none of us gets the type of life that we would want. But so long as we have a life, we also have a vehicle. And therefore, what is important is not that we try to get exactly the type of life that we want, because nobody gets it. As I say, life is never 100%. 100% as we would want it. So what is important is not to complain and grumble about the type of life or the type of vehicle we have, but rather to try and see how we can use the vehicle that we have for going towards the goal of life. Because if we understand where we have to go and we know some basics of how we can get there, then any vehicle is good enough for going towards the goal, or in other words, any type of life is good enough for going towards the goal of life. Not only any type of life is good enough, generally we get the type of life that is most suited for us for going towards the goal. So our life has been to quite some extent designed specifically for us. And we only have to see through that life to be able to understand how every bit of it, every curve and line, as Sri Aurobindo says, how every curve and line has a meaning in our life, how it can be used for addressing the purpose of life. This is particularly important for young people because they are very often confused about what type of a career to go for, and sometimes if they do not get the type of career that they were looking for, and that can happen because of intense competition about certain wanted careers, the person feels that now that is the end of life. This is what I wanted to become, and now that is not possible because I couldn't get into the right college, now there's not much left for me in life. But what is important to understand is that firstly, so long as you do something which constitutes your vehicle, at least a part of the vehicle is what the work that we do, it will provide enough opportunities for going towards the goal of life. Secondly, the type of vehicle that the person gets might in fact be better for this person, at least for this person. It might be a better vehicle than what the person wanted, because we don't always ourselves know what is best for us. So now that we have seen that the vehicle is not terribly important, we have to see how to use the vehicle, that is how to use life. Let's go to the next component of the journey, and that is the destination. Now for going towards the destination, what is most critical is to make the right choices. Because so long as we start in the right direction, after that, the crucial points that come, which would determine whether we go towards the goal or away from the goal, are the T-junctions, the forks, the crossroads, because that is where we have to make up our mind whether to turn right, to turn left, or to go straight. And depending upon the choice that we make, we may go towards the goal or away from it. The same applies also to life. The journey goes towards our goal only if we make the right choices. Now when we are on the road, we use a few tools for making choices, like a map, the road signs, and these days what we depend the most on is the GPS. What are the type of tools that we have available for going towards the goal of life? Since this course is on nutrition, let's take the example of eating. How do we choose the type of food that we eat? We may choose it on the basis of whether we like its taste or we don't like its taste, how palatable it is. Another criterion for choosing could be whether the food is healthy or unhealthy, and for that we depend upon our knowledge. What are the healthy foods? What will be good for my body? Is there something that can do harm to me because I have a certain type of prakriti? Now these are the types of things that we think of while making a choice. That is the second way. And the third tool that we may use for making these choices is what will be the impact of what I am eating on the rest of the world. Will it have minimum impact in terms of the carbon footprints? How will it affect the ecology? How will it affect the environment of the planet on which I am living? Will it inflict pain on another living creature? Now, these are the type of things also which we may think of, because what we eat does contribute to all these things. It affects the ecology, the environment of the world, and certain types of foods become available only after inflicting pain on animals. So these are the three types of tools that we may use for making choices. So basically we may go by our feelings, that is it is palatable, not palatable, that is feelings. We may go by reason, this food is healthy, this is not healthy, so let me choose the healthy foods. And the third is based on an inner voice which makes us feel that I should choose in an ethical manner, I should choose something that is eco-friendly, I should choose something which will not inflict pain on any animal. Now that comes from the third tool. So these are the three basic tools that we are using, and it's not essential that all three should be in conflict, but very often they are in conflict with each other. For example, the most palatable foods may be cakes and ice creams, but then too much of these will not be good for us, it will not be healthy, so there comes the conflict. Or we may want to eat out of greed, something that we like, but then that again will not be good for us. So we may feel like eating more, but we should not be eating more. So feelings come in conflict with reason, and they could also come in conflict with the inner voice, because some of the things that we find very palatable may not be eco-friendly, they may not be the most ethical choices of food. So these are the three basic tools that we can use for making any type of choices. What we have ended up doing unwittingly is also understanding who we are. And who we are, of course, we are the body, that is obvious, but we also have a mind, and the mind has these two aspects, the emotional part of the being and the intellect. The emotional part of the being is what feelings are about, and it is the intellect that uses reason as a major tool for deciding what we should be doing. And of course the intellect is useful for many other things. But then behind all this there is something that is not so obvious, and that is our divine essence, the soul. That is the source of this inner voice, which we sometimes call the voice of our deepest self, which may sometimes come in conflict with the feelings or the intellect or both. And this is the voice that tells us also what is right or wrong in unmistakable terms. So the soul is there, the divine essence is there, it does put in that whisper and about what is right and wrong. So the soul is there not just to give us the consolation that at least some bit of us will be there somewhere in the universe even after we are dead and gone. The soul also has a dynamic component, the dynamic component that guides us in life. And this dynamic component of the soul is what has been called the psychic being by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So who we are, of course, is the body and the mind. The mind has these two aspects, the emotional part of the being and the intellect. The body has often been referred to by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother as the physical, and the emotional part of the being as the vital, and the intellect as the mental. So that is the triad of physical, vital and mental, which you find a lot in the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. But then behind all this, which is visible on the surface, behind these instruments is our divine essence, of which actually these surface parts are a manifestation, and this divine essence is the soul, and the soul has a dynamic component, the psychic being. Now that we have seen the tools that we use for making choices, the question that arises is, which is the tool that takes us towards the goal of life? And as you might have guessed, it is the psychic being. That is the tool that actually takes us towards the goal of life. And to understand that, let's understand the characteristics of the inner voice, this inner voice. This inner voice, which comes from the psychic being, or the dynamic aspect of the soul, is a rather shy, faint, and non-assertive voice. In contrast, the emotional part of the being and the intellect are very noisy and assertive and persistent. So this is a rather shy, faint, and non-assertive voice, and therefore can get easily drowned, and it often does, in the noise made by the emotional part of the being and the intellect. This voice does not insist. It puts in that whisper and then it leaves it to you whether you want to pay heed to it or ignore it and do something else. While it is shy, faint, and non-assertive, all the same it is a very clear voice. It leaves us in no doubts about what the right thing to do is, and that type of clarity is lacking in the voice of the emotional part of the being and the intellect. That particularly the intellect, being very versatile, can justify just about everything, and therefore it seldom reaches a clear-cut conclusion. On the other hand, this inner voice is a very clear voice and leaves us with no doubts about what the right thing to do is, and it is a very quick voice. It tells us what we should be doing in a split second. On the other hand, the reason on which we have a tendency to depend is a rather laborious tool. It is a time-consuming tool, and that happens because it goes into an analysis of profit and loss, risk and benefit, and tries to choose what is on the whole most profitable and least risky. But then after it has reached a conclusion, it realizes that some factors were overlooked in the analysis. So it goes over the analysis all over again, and now it may come up with a different conclusion. So this vacillation, this uncertainty, these doubts which never become clear is a characteristic of reason. On the other hand, this inner voice is extremely clear, although it is quick, not time consuming like reason. Another characteristic of this inner voice is that if we pay heed to it, we get joy and lasting mental peace, and if we neglect it, we may develop a sense of guilt and recurrent uneasiness. Let's take the same example again. Suppose a person chooses on the basis of what is healthy, which the inner voice will not come in conflict with, and also chooses among the healthy foods those which will have minimum impact on the environment, which will not inflict pain on an animal. Now, eating this type of food gives the person immense joy. Joy which surpasses the happiness which the person might get by taking something which is more satisfactory to the palate but is either unhealthy or unethical. So the person gets a sense of joy, and more important, the person has lasting mental peace. I have made the best choice. On the other hand, if this person ends up choosing, say, non-vegetarian food, meat, because it is more palatable, he may find many reasons for doing it. For example, he may say that, well, I think this is what makes my diet more healthy. There is often a misconception, whether it is right or wrong will be a part of this course, whether a non-vegetarian diet is essential for getting a healthy diet. But this person does feel that, well, even if it is for the sake of health, I have eaten something which I should not have eaten. But all the same, this person can easily satisfy himself if he goes only by reason that I have eaten what is healthy, what is essential for me, and that is why I have taken this meat. And the person also feel I have taken it for social reasons, because it makes it easier for me to eat when I am outside, because if non-vegetarian food is served there, I don't make a fuss. If I invite somebody, I can offer non-vegetarian food which my guests will enjoy. Or if I am traveling and I go to a place where non-vegetarian food is available more easily than vegetarian food, then I will have no difficulty. While traveling, all types of food will be acceptable to me. And the person may also say that, well, that is how I am constituted, because biologically man is an omnivore. Man is an omnivore. He can survive both on plant and animal foods, and our intestinal structure is somewhere in between the type of structure and length of intestine, etc., the appendix and all that. We have somewhere in between pure carnivores like say tigers and pure herbivores like monkeys or rabbits. So we have somewhere in between. So biologically we are an omnivore who can and therefore is supposed to eat perhaps both vegetarian and non-vegetarian diet. And to me, the non-vegetarian diet appears more healthy. It also appears socially more convenient. So I found so many reasons to justify myself. But in spite of all these reasons, a sensitive person will once in a while feel guilty that what I am eating is inflicting pain on some animals. And off and on, whenever he feels this sense of guilt, he'll be uneasy. And that is one reason why many people, after consuming meat for several years, might one day decide to give it up. So out of choice they turn vegetarian. Which means that one of the characteristics of the inner voice is that when we pay heed to it, we get joy and lasting mental peace, although the person has given up something. Say for example, in this case, the person has given up palatable food. So giving up something that the person liked actually is giving him immense joy, which surpasses the happiness that he was getting by taking more palatable food. So this paradoxical type of joy, which feels better than the ordinary happiness, comes from listening to the inner voice, even if listening to this inner voice involves giving up something. And it gives lasting mental peace. In contrast, not paying heed to this inner voice leads to guilt and recurrent uneasiness. Well, one might say that, well, listening to this voice might be okay in spiritual terms, but my life is my business. And my destination in life is my destination. What is this destination which you have not even told anything about, towards which my life will go if I listen to this inner voice? Because all around me I find that people who are rich and famous and successful and powerful are the ones who are apparently not listening to their inner voice. And those are the type of goals I have. I want to be rich and famous and powerful. I don't want that nebulous goal which you have not even defined yet, towards which listening to the inner voice will take me. Now before that question is answered, let's try and see what all we get by listening to this inner voice. Or to put it in current jargon, what is there in it for me? So let's see that. We have already seen a few things that we get by listening to this inner voice: immense joy that surpasses ordinary happiness and lasting mental peace. And we escape guilt and recurrent uneasiness. Is there anything else that we get by listening to this voice? Another thing that we get is control over our happiness. How do we get this control? We get this control because the choices that come from the inner voice involve giving up something. And giving up something or giving something, which is an expression of love, are things which are always in our own hands, whereas getting something is not. I can love anybody, but I can't force anybody to love me. I can eat what I want, but I can't always I can give up something that I eat, but I can't always get to eat what I want. So giving up is always in our own hands. Giving something is in our own hands, but getting is not. So if my happiness depends on giving and giving up, then the happiness becomes independent of external circumstances, which means that now this happiness is within me, truly within me. The control over this happiness, my sense of well-being, is within me. I am not dependent upon anything or anybody for my happiness. So anybody would like to have this type of control, instead of being dependent on our circumstances, dependent upon things and people and possessions and so on for happiness. Another thing that we get by listening to these choices is absence of conflict. What type of conflict? The conflict between different parts of the being. We saw that the emotional part of the being, the intellect and the soul, can often come in conflict. Now how does this conflict disappear, or at least reduce and eventually disappear? This happens as a result of the experiences that we get if we make good use of those experiences. Every time we listen to the voice of the soul, we get joy and lasting mental peace. And every time we don't listen to this voice, we get a sense of guilt and recurrent uneasiness. Now, these are experiences that are being generated by the choices that we make. And experience leads to learning. Who learns in this case? The emotional part of the being and the intellect. Particularly the emotional part of the being, because we are ruled primarily by the emotions. Now, how do the emotions learn something from this? The emotional part of the being realizes that there is a certain category of choices which gives me joy and lasting mental peace. It starts figuring out what are the category of those choices. Loving, expressing love by giving up something which I may find comfortable but is not actually good for the world. So the person finds that these are the type of choices that give me joy, which feels better than ordinary happiness. On the other hand, the other type of choices may give me some fleeting pleasure, but eventually may lead to a sense of guilt and recurrent uneasiness. And therefore, this person's emotional part of the being, through these experiences, starts learning that there is a certain category of choices which are the better choices to make. And the result is that now it starts making the same type of choices as the soul habitually, naturally, spontaneously. Now, if the emotional part of the being has made a certain choice, the intellect usually falls in line quite easily, because that's a very versatile tool. It can justify everything. And the result is that now the emotional part of the being, the intellect and the soul, start speaking in the same voice more and more often. And that is what leads to a reduction in conflict, reduction in the frequency of the conflicts, reduction in the intensity of the conflict, and eventually the person may reach a stage when there is no conflict at all. Moving from where we are to the stage where there may be no conflict at all may be a long journey. But every step that we take in that direction leads to a reduction in conflict. Now, all these things, joy, lasting mental peace, not having guilt and recurrent uneasiness, having control over our sense of well-being, and absence of conflict between different parts of the being, translates into good mental health. And the mind-body relationship is now on a firm scientific footing. And therefore, if we are in good mental health, we also become physically healthy. So all this translates into good health. Is there anything else that we get by making this type of choices? Yes, there's one thing more, and that is a sense of fulfillment. Now, what is fulfillment? Fulfillment is the feeling that I don't want anything because I have everything. It is a little ahead of contentment. When we are contented, we may be still quite conscious of what all we don't have, but I say that, well, I can do without it. But fulfillment is the feeling that I don't need anything because I have everything. We do not feel any void, we do not feel any gap, we do not feel that there are certain things that I don't have which I have to do without, because I can do without them. I feel that I have everything. Now, this is something which becomes apparent to us, because if you ask somebody, what is it that you would like to have, before you feel that you don't want anything else. Particularly, say if we ask a young person, what is this young person likely to say? This person is likely to say that, well, if I have enough money to buy the important things in life so that I can lead a fairly comfortable and decent life, and if I have a good partner, if I got good children who are doing well at school, and if my interpersonal relationships with all my relatives and friends and at the workplace are good, and if the work that I do gives me a certain amount of intellectual satisfaction, then what else would I need? That is all that I need. Now, After that, there is nothing else that I would want. But that is something which the person thinks. Let's try and see if there are some people who have got all this. Have they felt fulfilled, or do they still feel that there is a certain gap in their life? Let's take one example here. The example of Mani Bhomik. Mani Bhomik is a person who was born in India and long back. And he grew up as a child during the Bengal famine of the 1940s. But and the circumstances at home were not very plentiful. Grew up in scarcity. But then in spite of the scarcity and the famine that he went through, being very intelligent, he managed to do a PhD from IIT Kharagpur. And after that, he got a postdoctoral fellowship for going to the US, where he got involved in laser research. And this research brought him a lot of money, because laser became a very field with a lot of applications, including those in medicine, and therefore he got a lot of royalties from the research that he had done, and therefore he could fulfill all the dreams of his youth, and ended up having several palatial houses like the one you see here in California. So he became a very rich and famous scientist, and got very well connected through all the awards and recognitions that he got. He came to know so many film stars in Hollywood, and all the important people around, including several presidents of the US, one after another, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, and all the presidents, one by one he became close to them. And the result was that he was invited to several parties. He started having parties at his home to whom he could invite all these important people. And life became so interesting and absorbing for him that gradually he forgot even science. It was no longer necessary for him to do much of scientific work, and he forgot also his spiritual roots in India. One day, after one party which he had at his house, the guests had all gone, and the servants were clearing the dishes, and this person was pacing up and down the hall, and then he found on the floor a visiting card that was flying from here to there. He picked up this card, read the name, probably it was a card belonging to some celebrity, and he just threw the card. Because an impulse crossed his mind, is this what life is all about? And he realized that the type of life that he was living might seem full of everything that a person would want, still had left a gap in his life. He was feeling a certain sense of emptiness. And with some effort, he figured out this emptiness was because of having forgotten the true purpose of life, which seemed to, the clues to which lay actually in his spiritual roots in India. The type of feeling that he got that day, he has described in his book, which he went on to write, Code Name God. The type of feelings that he got have been expressed here. One hears often of spiritual rebirth arising from despair and destitution. You see, every time we have a spiritual awakening, it is like a rebirth, because our old self dies to put us on a new path altogether, and this can be considered the beginning of a new life. So there's a rebirth while we are still living, before we have actually died in the normal sense of the word. So one can die and be reborn to a better life several times, and one of the ways it happens is through despair and destitution, which means when we are going through a traumatic event in life, an event which makes us feel totally helpless, all our resources of which we were proud prove completely useless in that situation. That is the type of situation in which we turn to a higher power, for whom everything is easy, who could possibly still be of some help to us. And that is the beginning of a new type of life, that is a spiritual rebirth. So that happens quite a lot. So one hears often of spiritual rebirth arising from despair and destitution, but it can also be prompted by an absence of want. This is something which is not often realized, that not only scarcity and difficulties and problems and traumatic events can lead to that spiritual awakening, it can also come from an apparent absence of want. When we have everything that anybody can ask for, and yet we feel that there's a gap in life, and that itself can become a wake-up call for giving a new direction to life. That can be the occasion of a spiritual rebirth. And the type of uneasiness that he felt, in spite of apparently having everything that anybody can ask for, he has described very beautifully as a queasy feeling of being overfed and undernourished at the same time. Overfed with material comforts, with material progress, and at the same time undernourished spiritually. And therefore, no matter how much we have of the things that satisfy the body in terms of comforts, the mind in terms of the physical comforts as well as the emotional relationships, and the intellect in terms of the intellectual satisfaction that we have got from our work, no matter how much the needs of the body, the emotional part of the being and the intellect have been taken care of, there still remains a gap, and that remains because the soul has not been addressed adequately while fulfilling the needs of the body and the mind. So that is what leads to this uneasy feeling, this queasy feeling. That's what leads to a feeling of something being still missing in life, there still being a void, a gap that somehow needs to be filled. Now Mani, Bhomik and many more have realized this, but there are many who do not. And that is again becoming important because many young people are becoming extremely rich at a very young age. People like the sports persons, film stars, beauty queens, and so on and so forth. And if they do not understand this basic fact, what happens is that they start getting this uneasy feeling. They can't put their finger at the right place why this emptiness is there, and they go into a depression. And that is why depression is so common amongst people who apparently have everything that anybody can ask for. So in short, what I get from making the choices which come from the deepest self or the soul, what I get is everything that anybody is looking for. And if that is so, there should not be much difficulty in accepting that as the purpose of life. And therefore, what we shall see now is how the purpose of life can be addressed, which can be easily understood in light of the background that we have already seen. But before we go to that, let's see this precious little quote from the mother, which talks about the importance of having an aim in life, a goal in life, a purpose in life. An aimless life is always a miserable life. But then there can be many types of aims. On the quality of your aim will depend the quality of your life. Now what is a high quality aim? A high quality aim is high and wide. It aims high, it is lofty, and it is wide, it is comprehensive, it is all encompassing, all embracing. It is not self-centered. It is generous and disinterested. Generous is gives. It loves. Love. True love involves giving. So it's generous and it's disinterested. It's not focused on the person himself. It makes choices which are irrespective of personal gain and loss. Well, of course, we may seem to lose something, but then we have seen that we are getting very intangible things, that joy, that lasting mental peace, etc., that we saw, that we do get in spite of making these choices which are basically disinterested in the ordinary sense. That is, there is no clear-cut material gain or loss, there is no satisfaction of egoistic desires, and yet we get so much from those choices. So it's an aim that is high and wide, generous and disinterested. This is what makes life precious to ourselves as well as to others. So this is the key to a meaningful life. This diagram sums it up. Here we have this person in this vehicle called life, and he comes across these junctures where a choice has to be made, and the emotional part of the being guides in one direction, the intellect in another direction, the soul in yet another direction. It's the soul that guides him towards the true goal of life. But then we do often make wrong choices. For example, if a person chooses at the level of the intellect, that doesn't mean that he can never go towards the goal. For example, on the road also, if we make a wrong choice because the direction towards which we should have turned has a traffic jam, or the road is under repair, so we can't go in that direction, we deliberately may make a wrong choice. But then that doesn't mean we can never go towards our destination. The only thing is the route becomes longer and zigzag. That is what happens here also, because the opportunities for making further choices keep coming, and in those new choices that we get, once again the soul comes into play and guides us in the right direction. Now, what are these dotted lines and these curves about? These are about the transformation of the emotional part of the being and the intellect, which as a result of this transformation start making choices similar to the choices made by the soul, and they start converging. So unlike the roads, the real roads in our road journey, these are roads that can bend. These can bend in such a way that making the right choices becomes easier for us. Now, what about the scenery here? The skyscrapers here and this greenery here. Now, the scenery can be different depending upon what choice we make on the road. In life, the scenery corresponds to these conditions and circumstances that we get in life. Particularly when it comes to major choices, they not only lead us towards the goal or away from the goal, these major choices also give us a new set of conditions and circumstances in life. These conditions and circumstances in life are what we call our destiny. And what it therefore means is that through the choices, particularly the major choices that we make, we can rewrite the destiny of our life. So the destiny is not an irrevocable document, a script that is written in its entirety and we just have to play it. It is a script that can be edited through the choices that we make in life. And here I'll give you an example. There's a person called Krishnan who lives in the city of Madurai in India. And as a young person, when he was around 30, he was working in a 5-star hotel, and he started applying abroad to get a more lucrative job. He landed a lucrative job in Switzerland and decided to take up that offer. The air ticket, the visa, everything was ready, and he was to leave the country after a week. But then he thought, let me go and say some prayers before I embark on this long journey. And when he went to a temple in Madurai, he found that outside the temple there was a long row of beggars, some of them too feeble even to beg. And it occurred to him, instead of going and feeding rich people in a 5-star hotel in Switzerland, why not feed these people? And now you can understand that if he goes and talks about this impulse that he got, and what is prompting him to now change his mind, not go to Switzerland and instead stay back, what would everybody tell him? You lost your mind. Huh? In a way he had, because he was not listening to the mind, he was listening to the soul. But he'll tell you, lost your mind, better go to Switzerland, make some money and come back, then you can do whatever social service you want. Do you think by not going to Switzerland, you will be able to wipe out hunger from the world? You will not be able to wipe it out even from the city of Madurai. Now that is the voice of the intellect. All his well-wishers are using the intellect to tell him that you will lose so much, but the world will gain very little. So those calculations of the intellect, trying to see the impact of what you do, the outcome, measuring the outcome in which has become a very fashionable thing to do these days. Whatever we do, what is the outcome? Evaluate it objectively. So that is what his well-wishers are trying to tell him. You will not be able to wipe out hunger even from the city of Madurai. Forget the world. So better go. Now, but this person decided not to go. takes a lot of courage. We saw in that opening song also that we need courage to do the right thing. Why do we need that courage? Because we sometimes start feeling that, probably these people are right, because our intellect also starts putting in that same type of calculations. All these people can't be wrong. But then if a person has decided to listen to this inner voice, somehow this keeps coming back to him again and again. He feels more and more sure this is the only thing to do, and he acquires the courage to do it. Why did he acquire that courage? Because the soul is our divine essence. The divine is not only all-knowing, it is also all-powerful. It is because of the all-knowing character of the divine that the voice of the soul is extremely clear and has absolutely no doubts associated with it. And therefore the person feels that this is the only right thing to do. But the divine is not only all-knowing, it is also all-powerful. And it is this all-powerful character of the divine that gives this person the courage to stand up to the whole world if necessary, to be able to listen to the voice of his soul. So that is where the courage comes from. And Krishnan got that courage. He did not go to Switzerland. Instead, he collected a few other friends from the profession. They started getting up very early in the morning. They would cook some simple food and feed a few hundred homeless people in Madurai before going for their regular work. And eventually his parents also came around, and they told him, well son, you are feeding so many people, we can feed you, so don't worry, don't have to go to Switzerland. So he eventually went on to establish an NGO, and the world took notice of him when he was selected as one of the 10 young heroes of the world by the CNN in the year 2010. So his work has been expanding, the money available to him has been growing, and he didn't go to Switzerland. Now, one of the things that happened as a result of the choice that he made was to get a different type of scenery. If he had gone by the voice of the intellect and gone to that 5-star hotel, he would have been surrounded by these skyscrapers, and it would have been a different type of vehicle, a different type of life altogether. Of course, any vehicle theoretically is good enough for going towards the goal of life, so he would have got opportunities for addressing the purpose of life also in Switzerland. But then he made another choice where the scenery is different, the scenery in Madurai, and that is the new type of vehicle that he made a choice for. Although theoretically any vehicle is good enough for going towards the goal of life, there are good vehicles and bad vehicles, and certainly the type of vehicle that he got by staying back in India, by staying back in Madurai, was a much better choice in terms of addressing the purpose of life. So he rewrote his destiny by making that choice. Instead of being in Switzerland, he was here and engaged in a very different type of work. So he rewrote his destiny through that choice, and that is what these different types of scenery are indicating in this picture. Now let's spend a few minutes on what the true goal of life is. One way of looking at it is that the true goal of life is a total transformation. That is a total transformation of the emotional part of the being and the intellect, so that there is no conflict left between these two and the soul. Now you see, if we have to avoid any conflict, there are two ways of achieving it. One is that if there are three entities and there is a conflict, they all try to work out a compromise. They adjust to each other, bend a little bit so that they can come to a consensus. Another way is that two of the entities within those three understand that the third one is the wisest and bend themselves to suit the third one. Here you can see that the conflict is being resolved by the second method. The emotional part of the being and the intellect are gradually realizing that the soul is perfect, so they are gradually, through the experiences that they are getting in life, bending themselves to suit the soul more and more frequently, more and more consistently. And there can come a stage, therefore, when they start doing it all the time, constantly, habitually, their life gets organized around this deeper self, because the mind is making the same choice. Both the emotional part of the being and the intellect are speaking in the same language as the soul, and the body, of course, is a docile instrument, and therefore does what the mind tells it to do, and therefore the body, the mind and the intellect have become one with the soul. This is what we may call is the unification of the body, mind and the spirit. The spirit is more or less the same as the soul. So this is what is implied in the glib expression used very commonly these days, the union of body, mind and spirit. So this can be considered the goal of life. This is also the type of union that yoga talks about, and therefore the goal of life is the same as the goal of yoga. Now, what is the difference between the goal of life and the purpose of life? The goal is a fixed point, a destination at which there will be a total unification. But then that remains a remote and theoretical destination for most of us, because various compulsions, obligations and, more important, our inner weaknesses make it difficult for us to reach the goal within a lifetime. And therefore, what we have to settle down for is going towards the goal, going in the right direction. If we understand the process, probably we'll take more steps in the right direction. And the more steps we take, the better. And that is what becomes then the purpose of life, to take as many steps as possible in the right direction, that is towards the goal. So the goal is a destination, the purpose is direction oriented. Now, based on what we have talked, let's spend a few minutes on how the purpose of life can be addressed. Firstly, by making the right choices in life, and we have seen that the right choices come from the deepest self, and we should, if we pay heed to it, we get all the things that we are looking for. So making the right choices does not mean that we have to live a deliberately painful life. It's a different type of joy. Krishnan got the type of joy that many people could not understand. And that's why it said that one half of the world does not understand the happiness of the other. So we have to make the right choices in life, and those choices, the best of choices, will also give us joy and lasting mental peace and all the other things that we are looking for. The more steps we take in that direction, the more of those things we will get. But that will also end up addressing the purpose of life, and that is what our focus should be. That is living a meaningful life. Those things that we get, joy, lasting mental peace, etc., are mere byproducts. They'll come automatically. They'll come without our aiming at. So making the right choices in life. The second important thing is the attitude to work. What should that be? Like, the attitude of Karma Yoga as defined very well in the Gita. That is working without a sense of being the doer. I am not the doer of the work. I am only an instrument of the divine. And not being attached to the outcome of the work. The outcome is in the hands of the divine. So I surrender to the divine, and do not insist on a particular outcome. Do not insist. Do not get attached to the outcome. Doesn't mean that I do not expect an outcome. If I perform something A, any intelligent person would expect a result B. That is the outcome. So there's no harm in expecting a certain outcome, but then I should understand that the outcome may turn out to be not only different, but entirely opposite to the type of outcome I'm looking for, and I'm prepared for it, and also with the understanding that the outcome that actually I get may be better than the outcome that I had in mind. To give you a crude example, a person, saw a vision that every night that he should move a stone outside his house. There was a big stone outside his house, and he was told in this vision, apparently from the divine, to push that stone. So he started pushing that stone every day, but the stone didn't move. So once again that same vision came, and he told that you have told me to push this stone. I have been doing it every day, but the stone is too heavy, I can't move it. So then he was told, well, who told you to move the stone? You had been told only to push the stone. Just see how strong your muscles have become. So he had not realized that it was in his for his own good that he had been told to push the stone. So the outcome was different from what he had in mind. He thought that the outcome should be that the stone should move, but the outcome was actually better than the movement of the stone. So we accept that whatever the outcome, it will be better than the outcome I have in mind, so that I can accept it very gladly. But at the same time, while the outcome is not in my hands, I still put my heart and soul into the work, because I offer the work to the divine. I offer the work to the divine because it is my privilege that, in spite of having no scarcity of instruments, the divine has chosen me to be the instrument for this work. I put my heart and soul into it because it is the divine who has given me the abilities to do this work and also the opportunity to do it. And therefore I adore the divine, and if you love somebody, you are happy to offer whatever you have, or whatever you are, or whatever you do to the one whom you love. So it is this sense of devotion that one develops for the divine because of all the privileges that one has received, which enable the work to be initiated, sustained and completed, that the person is happy to offer the work to the divine. And therefore the work should be fit enough to be offered, and therefore the person puts his heart and soul into the work. Then the attitude to ups and downs. No matter how wisely a person lives, that does not make the person immune to a road accident, to an incurable illness, or a failed marriage, or a heavy financial loss. All these can happen, and all these can be an opportunity for spiritual growth, an opportunity for an awakening. Both fortune and misfortune, ups and downs, the events which we perceive as pleasant and events which are ordinarily perceived as unpleasant, both can be opportunities, as we saw a short while ago while talking about money Bhomik, that one can grow through want and trauma and difficulties. One can also grow through absence of want, which is normally seen as a good fortune. So both can be opportunities in life for going in the right direction. Now, if the work that we do and the opportunities that we get for making choices and how we respond to the ups and downs of life, if in all that we can bring in the totality of the being, the soul, and that is what the guidance in yoga is about, then essentially all life is covered. What else is there in life except the work that we do, the ups and downs that we experience, and in the course of living, the opportunities or situations that we face in which a choice has to be made. That is what life is made up of. And if yoga enters, the guidance provided by yoga enters all these points, all life becomes yoga. So the visible and the invisible part, the visible part we all understand, the invisible part is what we have talked about today. And it is because everything that happens to us in life, everything that we do in life is an opportunity for the practice of yoga that Sri Aurobindo said, all life is yoga. It doesn't mean all life, no matter how lived, is yoga. What it means is all life is suitable as a field, as an opportunity for the practice of yoga. The suggested reading, this is a book which tells you a lot more than we have discussed today, and we had discussed in much greater detail in Yes.01, the class recordings of which are also available on our YouTube channel. The book is Understanding Spirituality and Living It 24/7. This book is available as an ebook on Amazon, and for a hard copy you can drop an email to us at yes@yesspirituality.com. This is another book that people with a spiritual inclination may find useful. This book has 268 short essays, on an average about 2 pages each, on a wide variety of topics which a person with a spiritual inclination is likely to have some curiosity about. And this book is available for free download on our website yesspirituality.wordpress.com. The book has still not been printed, but the ebook is available and you can download it from our website. In any case, we love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments, please drop an email to yes@yesspirituality.com. My gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making this event possible, and thank you all for being there and listening patiently.
We can take questions now. In case anybody has any question, they can unmute themselves or ask, or also write it in the chat box.
Excuse me, I have a question. Good morning.
Yes, please.
Could you please elaborate the difference between the goal and the purpose?
The goal is where we have to reach. The purpose is to go in the right direction, so that at least we are nearer the goal. Say, for example, if one has to go from Delhi to Chennai, the train will first go to Agra and then to Bhopal. So, going from Delhi up to Agra is addressing only the purpose. The destination will be reached only in Chennai. But at least when we have reached Agra or Bhopal, we are nearer Chennai. Why that is important is because the spiritual philosophy on the basis of which we are talking is essentially Vedanta. Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is also one of the, you can say, forms of Vedanta, integral Vedanta. Now in Vedanta, one of the basic things is rebirth, which means that the journey of the soul is not complete in one life. We all have to keep coming back again and again for this journey to be completed. We might have started as animals. The first time we get a human birth on this earth is itself a great privilege. And after that, we can walk this path consciously. Till then, our evolution was spontaneous through a natural process. Animals do not aim at spiritual growth. Their life revolves basically around feeding and breeding. But human being is the first creature who is not satisfied with feeding and breeding and other material aspects of life. He starts looking for something more, starts looking for something beyond. That is a characteristic human aspiration. And in the beginning, when he is the first time he's born as a human being, he's not very conscious of the true purpose of life. He lives more like an animal than as a human being. And therefore it is only by accident that he may, through trial and error, end up in his life with the soul sufficiently evolved, or the individual sufficiently evolved to be at a little higher level of consciousness than he arrived at, that he has taken through trial and error a few steps towards the goal. So he has addressed the purpose of life not very consciously. But then at the end of life, when this soul departs, it decides to come back after a stay in wherever in the other world it is, to this world again. And then it picks up from the place where it left off in the previous life. So therefore it may take several lives before the person reaches a point where he becomes even conscious of the process and understands that, well, this is the true purpose of life and it is in this way that I can address it. So he ends up choosing one of the spiritual paths which will take him towards the goal. So now he starts doing it consciously, so the journey becomes a little faster. But in each of these lives, he is actually addressing the purpose of life. It is only when he arrives so evolved on earth as a result of all the homework that he put in the previous lives that now he is very near the goal. Now only a few finishing strokes are needed. And when he has accomplished those finishing strokes, all the time, of course, people thought that he is different from the others. But then now that he has put in those finishing strokes, he is a self-realized soul. He has sort of realized what his true self is. He has become one with himself, one with that, and now he is constantly aware of it, and his life can be organized around this. But this has happened after several lives. And that is why for most of us it is the purpose that is more important than the goal, because that is what we will end up doing in this life. But if we are doing it consciously, as most of those who are seeing it would be, because that is what has made you sort of feel that this is the type of course that we should be doing. So you are doing it, you will be probably doing it consciously. You can take more steps, reach nearer, and maybe if some of you have that courage and the previous work behind, maybe you will reach the goal itself in this life. But we don't have to be obsessed with the goal, because being obsessed with the goal doesn't make us any nearer the goal. Actually, it outdistances the goal. That is another interesting that happens. So we have to do what we have to be doing. The divine grace will help us further, and we will make the type, our progress will be taken care of by the divine. So we leave the progress, that is how much movement we make towards the goal, to the divine, surrender that to the divine, leave that to its care, and just do our bit. So that is why for all practical purposes it is the purpose which is more important than the goal. And this idea of rebirth, which some of you seeing it may not agree with, Sri Aurobindo sort of gives a very rational explanation for it, for those who decide to go by reason. In the Life Divine, he says that if the ultimate purpose of human existence is to fulfill that aspiration which is hidden somewhere in every human being, that is to go beyond the surface, beyond what is obvious, beyond the basic needs of feeding and breeding, if that is the purpose of life, and the final goal while addressing that purpose cannot be reached in one lifetime, then rebirth becomes a rational necessity for reaching the goal. So because the journey is not of much use unless we reach the goal, and if the goal cannot be reached in one lifetime, rebirth becomes a rational necessity. Sorry for a rather long answer, just to distinguish between the goal and purpose, but I thought a few related things come out. That's how questions help. A few related things always come out.
I think I got some idea, but not absolute clarity so far. Maybe one can say the goal of the current life could be the purpose of this life. Eventual goal could cut across different lives.
Yes.
Some explanation.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You understood it very well.
The next question is how to deal with negativity around us created by others.
That is something that we have to try and sort of ignore, minimize, avoid, but not take it as a serious problem, because the difficulty is more within than outside us. And our concern is also primarily our own spiritual growth. The fact that we end up addressing or encouraging the spiritual growth of others through what we do, whether it is through the type of actions that we do, or it is through just setting an example, creating the right atmosphere, all those are different things that do happen. So an individual's growth does become to some extent the cause of the growth of a few others or many others around him. That is not what the person should be concerned with. So if we see any negative, that's why the mother has said, that if we see any negativity around us, we should take it as a mirror. What it means is there are some weaknesses within me that I have to work on. So we have to keep turning within and try and see what is it that I have to work on, so that these negativities which I have are not there. The negativities outside then will start affecting me less and less. Having said that, if the atmosphere is negative beyond a certain point, then a certain degree of aloofness, isolation may become necessary, but then not because one has any ill feelings or ill will or hatred towards those who are creating this negativity, but just to prepare a sort of a physical geographical shield. The shield will become less and less necessary as the person's own spiritual armor grows, because as you grow spiritually, you also develop a spiritual armor, so that this negativity will affect less and less. But all the same, till it has reached a level where you can handle this negativity, creating some sort of a geographical barrier, creating some sort of a geographical distance is quite acceptable. And the only thing we have to keep in mind is that take all that negativity also as a manifestation of the divine, take it as a part of the divine play. Because when we talk of things in the world which are divine and undivine, that is only a convenient classification. Because what we perceive as undivine is also a manifestation of the divine. If everything is a manifestation of the divine, it also includes what we perceive as the undivine. And therefore, if we keep that in mind, we will realize that not only everything is the divine, but also that this mixture of what is clearly the divine and what is apparently the undivine, this mixture is also a part of that play, and it also has a purpose. Because without that, the evolution of consciousness which is happening on this planet and happening consciously through, partly consciously through human beings, would not happen. Because if, and that is why it doesn't happen in the other worlds where the creatures with a similar level of consciousness are all herded together in that world. So if you had all good or all evil on this earth, it would be like one of those other worlds, and there will not be much stimulus and much opportunity for further spiritual growth. On this world, that happens only because we have positivity and negativity, divine and what seems to be undivine, the opposites which we identify as virtue and sin, opposites that we identify as good and evil, all these coexist in this world. And it is this mixture of these apparent opposites that creates on the planet an opportunity for evolution of consciousness.
Next question is, if we are guilty of doing something and we cannot do anything now, how to make peace with the inner soul so that the present life is not attached to it and guilt doesn't keep coming back?
Yeah, that's an important question. In a spiritual life or in yoga, we do not go on a guilt trip. We do enough of introspection and inner churning to be able to sort of realize that yes, I made a mistake. I knew somewhere deep within that what I am doing is not the best thing to do, and yet due to certain reasons I did not listen to that and I did something different. And we resolve that on the next time such an opportunity comes, I will not repeat it. So we do this inner churning sufficiently to be able to remember it the next time, and we do make a conscious effort, and when we succeed in doing so, there's no harm in also giving yourself a pat on the back. Well, I made good use of that lesson that I learned. Another thing that we can do in these situations is that we may not be able to undo what we have done, but if that involves some other person, then we can always apologize to that person. Or we got angry with somebody else because somebody hurt us and we had magnified that hurt. We had taken that hurt too seriously, and that is why we got angry with that person. We can apologize even to that person that I know that you didn't mean what I thought you meant, and now all is forgotten. So going more than halfway is one of the signs of love. And this is what going more than halfway means, that being always ready to apologize and forgive. So it becomes easier for us to apologize and forgive and forget. Then it becomes sort of that becomes one way of dealing with the guilt that we are feeling.
There are no more questions in the chat box, so if anybody would like to unmute and ask, we still have few minutes, you can ask. Alright, so if we don't have any more questions, we come to the end of today's session. Tomorrow's session will be on an introduction to Ayurveda, so log in at the same time. And we end with the music today. Thank you everyone once again for joining. See you all tomorrow.
तू क्यों फंसा है रे पर ब्रह्म के रस से तेरा नस नस बसा है रे आनंद तू ही परमानंद तू ही आनंद तू ही परमानंद तू ही ओम में बस कर ओम में रम कर ओम में मिलना है शब्दों के जंगल में बसा है रे। पर ब्रह्म के रस से तेरा नस नस बसा है रे। मान अपमान होता कहाँ है, ये तो है शब्दों की पकड़। मान अपमान होता कहाँ है, ये तो है शब्दों की पकड़। भले बुरे शब्द तुझे गिरा दें, इतना तो नहीं है कमज़ोर। ओम में बस कर, ओम में रम कर, ओम में मिलना है शब्दों के जंगल में। तू क्यों बसा है रे, पर ब्रह्म के रस से तेरा नस नस बसा है रे। शब्दों के जंगल